Broadcasting from London, Ontario, Canada. Welcome. I'm Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, where we are celebrating and sharing the significance of our true selves and stories. Have an incredible story for you today. And the best part is it's a true story about Play On, Canada's largest hockey tournament and sports festival, which holds the Guinness record as the largest street hockey tournament in the world. I'm going to give you more context about that and how it started, what it was like at its peak, where it went, will it ever come back? And we're going to talk about that with the founder of Play On, Scott Hill, in just a couple of moments. Before we do that, I want to say a quick thank you to Connect One Consulting, one of the supporters of Journeys with the No Schedule Man. If you're looking to expand your professional network, grow your business, I encourage you to reach out to Gord at connectoneconsulting.com. Thanks also to Laura Ma at Diamond and Gold Treasures, some of the finest jewelry in the area, also offering jewelry repair, custom design, and layaway. You can find out more about what Laura does at Diamond and Gold Treasures at diamondsgold.com. You can see it there on the screen if you're watching the video. If you're listening to the audio, that was not very helpful to you. And put his head between Diamond and Gold, diamondsgold.com. Thanks also to Susan and Luke from Travel Agents in Action. If you are traveling with anybody with special needs, with autism, Susan is the person that you want to reach out to. She's certified in special needs and an autism travel professional, as well as being a fully T-code certified travel agent. She can help you with wherever you want to go and making that smooth and enjoyable for you. You can find out more about Susan at foreverpreciousmemories.ca. Another one of my favorite people is Brett Lucier from Provincial Glass and Mirror. Scott Hill, today's guest, and I were just talking about the fact, well, Scott brought up the fact that that this is episode 97, and he was thinking about the significance of that in the hockey world. If you go back to episode 87, and there's at least, I don't know, one player that's had a little bit of success with that number in professional hockey, at least at the time of this recording. Episode 87 of Journeys with the No Schedule Man features Brett Lucier, the owner of this company, Provincial Glass and Mirror. Quite a story about entering in on the ground level and working all the way up over the course of 18 years to owning this company, Provincial Glass and Mirror. They've been a terrific support, and really encourage you to listen to that story of Brett's, because it's a good one. It'll show you what how much power there is in resourcefulness and good old-fashioned hard work. Thanks also to Carol at Trickett Financial, offering insurance and investments for Canadians and newcomers to Canada. You can connect with her at trickettfinancial.com. You can also see Carol and Laura, who I mentioned earlier, in some of the videos that have been posted on my Facebook page at facebook.com/noscheduleman, where we've just done some slice of life type things and ask a question or two about why they got into the business that they're into and what a day's like, what their interests are. Lots of fun. It gives you a chance to get to know some of these people personally, including Carol from Trickett Financial. And finally, Mo Mondays London, the inspirational event series hosted by yours truly. What's it like? Well, I like to tell people, think TEDx meets The Tonight Show with maybe a little bit of The Muppet Show tossed in. If you like this, exploring real stories like what we're going to share with Scott Hill in just a moment, you will absolutely love Mo Mondays London. There's really nothing else quite like it, and the energy around it. We are at the London Music Club in London, Ontario, Canada, once a month. You can learn more at momondays.com/London. Also want to remind you that if you'd like to be in touch on a regular basis and work with somebody related to mindset or marketing messaging, especially if you're in small to mid-sized business, I really enjoy helping people with that. We've got people from literally all around the world involved in my online community. You can find out more at noscheduleman.com/mastermind. It's affectionately been known as the Turtle Tribe when it launched back in 2017. We also refer to it as the Mindset and Marketing Mastermind community, and you would be more than welcome to join us there. I would love to have you. It's available if and whenever you feel ready. I'm really excited about this conversation. I'll give you a little bit of background. Play On is Canada's largest hockey tournament and sports festival. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it holds the Guinness record as the largest street hockey tournament in the world. Now, the Play On program operated nationally here in Canada between 2004 and 2017 in partnership with CBC's Hockey Night in Canada, for the last 10 of those seasons. It was a series of individual events. This is how it was made up. Series of individual events held annually from coast to coast across Canada. Each of those events offering a festival atmosphere with recreational and competitive street hockey tournament divisions. They had divisions for all genders, all skill levels, all ages. Really a terrific event. The list of positive attributes that it brought to the community and to the individuals, the families of community organizations that participated is long, and we'll maybe get into that a little bit with Scott. Since the program's inception back in 2003, let this soak in, more than 2 million. Boy.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
All right. Some technical difficulties there. I hope that you're hearing and seeing me okay. I'm going to bring Scott back into the broadcast, and this is what happens when you produce something live, is sometimes you get some unexpected surprises. Scott, tell me that you can hear me all right.
Yeah, I hear you just fine, Kevin. I was really enjoying listening to you as always, and then all of a sudden you were gone.
I didn't do it intentionally. It was something that happened on the interwebs somewhere. I apologize. Thanks to those who are watching and stayed with us. A little bit of a technical glitch, and hopefully we'll have smooth sailing from here. It's really nice to see your face and to hear your voice. Before we get into any of this, how are you and your family doing these days? It's been a few years since we caught up. How are you guys doing?
Well, I appreciate you asking, Kevin. And before I answer that, I just want to say that I think about you and our interactions over the years. Prior to you becoming No Schedule Man, you were. I think we first met when you were working with Bell Media, and I at that time was working with lots of Bell Media and Rogers Radio representatives, and others across the country, and I'm just going to come out right out and say it. And this might some people might not like this, but you were my favorite. and so we were in 30 some different cities at the time, and so we had a radio representative or two in each market. But you've always been a great colleague and peer and even friend, and we've had a lot of great conversations over the years. So I'm grateful that you've given me this opportunity. Our family's doing fine. Our oldest daughter is 19, and she completed a year of university and then decided to go away. She's in Paraguay right now. She's serving a humanitarian mission there. We have 2 in high school still here. We have 4 teenagers, and we have 7 children total. So some people know that about us. We have a large family. It's the joy of our lives, and everybody's healthy and well. So I appreciate you asking. I'm curious how your family's doing too.
Everybody's terrific. They are doing, I guess, what they're supposed to be doing. They're growing, and one of them, I don't know whether you ever crossed paths or not. I remember you gave me a play-on hat to give to him. Jaden, my youngest son, he'll be 14 in a couple of months. He's a former play-on participant, still doing competitive hockey with the London Bandits.
Good.
The other one, Eddie, is 17, and yeah, everybody's good. And thanks for asking, and thanks so much for your kind words. I've always really appreciated you. I'm really interested and really appreciate from a number of different perspectives how much play-on has meant to you, what it's brought to this community, to this country over the years, and the individuals in it. And we've had a lot of conversations, none of which have really been public, about where it could go and what might happen. And it'd be interesting, I think, to have this conversation today, um, to be able to pick up where we maybe left off, but also to be able to look back on and maybe see where things go from here. I wonder if we could maybe set the stage and give some context to some people that find this conversation maybe that aren't as familiar. And let's, if you would, Scott, let's jump off in the middle of the story. And as best you can, how would you describe Play On when it was at what you would view as its peak? What would you describe it? What was it? What did it look like?
Well, those were fun times. That would have probably been 2013, 2014. We were operating in a given annual season, and a season for us would be the months of basically May until September. So we were in 22 different cities. We would travel between cities. We had operations. These are, the 20 plus largest markets in the country of Canada. And then culminating with a national championship event where the winners from each of the 21 other events would gather and compete live on CBC television for the title of Canada's greatest street hockey players. And at one point, a trophy called the Redwood Cup that sat in the Hockey Hall of Fame, with big cash prizes for the winners in the male and the female divisions. We had over 6,000 teams participating. There would be 7 players on a team. So in our largest season, just over 42,000 players. Spectators were always difficult to estimate because we didn't, have a ticketing system where, the events are open to the public and free to attend. So it was always tough to know how big any given event was. And if it was sunny, we'd get more than if it was rainy. But likely somewhere between 300 and 400,000 people at the 22 events across the country in the course of a single season. And it was quite people think of street hockey as this pastime that is fun and not organized. And so when they think about, a national street hockey program, if you haven't seen the events, you really don't really know what to think. But really, it was a highly complex, somewhat sophisticated logistical enterprise in terms of, when you consider how large Canada is and how spread out so many of these communities are, and the need to move trucks and trailers and people from event to event to event, and to shut streets down. And in our case, 2 days to set up, 2 days to operate the event, and then to close down. So anyways, I probably gave you a much longer, boring answer than most people wanted, but that really, was probably our heyday.
It's not boring at all. And as you might remember, I've got some experience in the event management field. I used to be the general manager of a NASCAR sanctioned stock car racing track. And so when I look at something, when you combine that with the media sales and marketing background, I was always fascinated by how you managed, you and your team and all of the people across the country to grow that. And for you personally, how you how you would manage to keep your I'm not sure which superlative I'm looking for. It's just it's a lot. It's these things, when you're involving other people, they become these kinds of living, breathing creatures of their own that you really just have to try to steer. And especially when you're looking at things like people's safety, and it's obviously a participation sport, and logistics and dealing with cities and just what could be involved in that. Let's go back earlier in the story, because we're going to come back to the middle here a little bit. But before we talk about how you got to staying true to the model that you built, let's talk about building the model. Where did the whole idea of Play On come from to begin with? How was it born?
It's funny as I reflect back on it. when I was doing my undergraduate studies, I was in Edmonton at the University of Alberta, and I got a part-time job working for the Edmonton Oilers. And so I was doing game day stuff. If you've been to an NHL hockey game, you've probably seen the guys that shoot T-shirts into the crowd, and there's more and more of those fan activities that have come in the years. That was 1993, so way back when, many years ago. But anyways, I worked for the Oilers, and we invented that the first slingshot that was used anywhere in the NHL to shoot T-shirts into the crowd. We made that out of surgical tube, and we came up with this idea. So I kind of got into the whole, the hockey industry and the fan kind of side of the industry back then. I was only involved for a year. I went away and lived overseas for a couple of years after that. But when I came back, I went into business school and moved back to London, Ontario. I'm from Kingsville, down near Windsor. And anyways, I became aware of the Gus Macker 3-on-3 basketball program. And also there was a second event that the NBA was also running, a 3-on-3 basketball program that they had built and were running in Canada. And my brother actually played in the NBA 3-on-3. It's called Hoop It Up event. And so I'm in London. I'm at the Ivy Business School, and I saw this event, and I had my little background in hockey, and I was looking for a job, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my career. And I kind of really wanted to go back to working in sport because I loved it so much. Anyways, I just had this idea that, this concept that the NBA had put together, which they were using to try to grow the sport of basketball in Canada. And of course, back then, basketball wasn't really that big in Canada. And it was, the Raptors were just starting to become a thing. And I remember the NBA's largest event in not just Canada, but actually all of North America, believe it or not, London, Ontario. The setting around Victoria Park, for those that are here in London, they know the streets, Wellington and Dufferin and Central, and this big, beautiful green space in between. And it was just the perfect setting. And so I saw this event and the magic of it, and I saw the impact on the faces of the kids and the parents as they were watching. And I just thought, geez, this concept really is transferable to street hockey. Wouldn't it work with street hockey? I mean, aren't there 3 hockey players in Canada to every 1 basketball player? And wouldn't it make sense, like hasn't everybody who plays hockey in Canada picked up a stick and knocked around a ball in their driveway or basement or a cul-de-sac at some point in their lives, So I started doing a little bit of research. It wasn't associated with my studies at all. It was after my studies completed, and I was trying to find an opportunity in sport, and I applied to all 30 NHL teams, and I sent my resume around, and that was in the days before professional sports teams were hiring MBAs. It was pretty uncommon, and so I ended up getting one job offer, and it was to be a receptionist for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I $12 an hour, and of course I had 2 kids already at that time, and I had invested $100,000 in my graduate studies, and I simply couldn't afford to move to Toronto, on that salary. So I decided that I was going to pursue this idea to start something. I never thought in a million years I'd be the type of person to try to start something like this. It's just that I didn't have any other opportunities, and I just really thought that it might work, So I don't know if you want me to keep going a little bit and take it further, but that's really how it all started, and it was just an idea. And my wife Cassandra, she's been such a huge part of this story, and she's the one that encouraged me to give it a go. So when we're done our conversation at the end of today, I think your viewers will realize that she really is the hero of this story.
From where I appreciate you setting the table. Thank you. It's great background. It's interesting to reflect back. I've always been a basketball fan as well. And how when the Raptors came to Toronto, I think that was 95, wasn't it? Somewhere around there. I know they just won the championship last year at the time of this recording, but no, it's interesting to reflect back on how big those Gus Macker and Hoop It Up were and are. But now you've got this idea. You've arrived at the point that you've just described for us. What happens next? Because now I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about, gee, man, it's a great idea, but you're talking about going to a city and asking them to shut streets down for this idea that you have, and insurance and registration and volunteers and marketing and where do you start? What do you do first to just even try to make this thing real?
Well, the first thing that I did was try to find somebody who could help me. And, I reached out to one of my colleagues at the business school. I was 27. He was 37. He was the top of the class and had a lot of experience in just financial trading and a lot of just general business experience that exceeded my own. I was pretty middle of the class, pretty average hockey player, just happy to be at Ivy kind of guy. And anyways, we formed a partnership. He agreed that there was some potential, and in that first year, we put a business plan together. It was I still have some copies of it in my files, but it was pretty elaborate and around 100 pages. And we did our diligence and kind of thought we might be able to address all the potential challenges. Of course, we were wrong about that. But we decided that, we recognized we needed to put some investment money together if we were going to make a go of it. And so we also recognized that the business plan would be most likely to succeed if we could get the NHL or somebody like that to support the plan. So that's what we did. We went out, started trying to find some investment, and we went out and tried to get a meeting with the NHL. And we were, I guess, mostly unsuccessful with the first of those tasks, and completely unsuccessful with the second one of those tasks. It actually, the way the story goes is we actually did end up getting a meeting with the NHL, but it took several months, 7-8 months before we were able to do that. And ultimately, when we got in and made our pitch, they gave us a quick no. So we were able to convince a few of our family members. I mean, I don't come from a family that has a lot of resources, and neither did he. And but we scrounged together a little, just enough, really, to try to run one event. We'd hoped to do 12 events in that very first year. This was 2003, but we weren't able to get the support we needed. So we decided to run one event, and our plan, with our business plan, when we hoped that it would come together, we kind of planned that we would start in the east part of Canada and then gradually move to the west. And so we ran that first event in 2003 in Halifax, largely because we had just done the most work in that city, because that was going to be the place that we started. So we basically canceled our plans to do the other 11, and then we focused on trying to do just one. And that event, nearly, it's a whole other story. I mean, every stage of this is its own story, Kev. So I don't know, but that's really what got us to our first event. I guess we'll pick up there if you want to do that.
What, just trying to get that to life, what immediately comes to mind as one or two of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome just to even get that first one up and going?
Well, the biggest challenge was working in a market that was far away from my home, in a place where I had no contacts. I literally had, I didn't know a single person from Halifax. We didn't have a location. I didn't know the city. I had to, go build some rapport with people that work at the Halifax Regional Municipality, convince them that I was competent enough, capable enough to justify their closure of the streets for a big road hockey tournament. And each step was very, very difficult. Eventually we were lucky enough to convince them that it was worth a shot. And one of the ladies, I still remember her name, Ann Wambolt, she's the one that said, "Hey, you should really do this at the Halifax Commons," and she worked for the city. And so, I didn't really have a concern about where we did it. I just kind of thought, we want to try it and find some street where we can make this a go. Kind of like I had in my mind a vision of what had happened in London, and I wanted to try to recreate that everywhere, But anyways, that venue in Halifax turned out to be solid gold. It was right in the heart of the city, and there was challenges with getting teams in promoting. How do you promote an event that was pre-social media? Facebook hadn't really come out yet, and so you're working with traditional media, of course, with radio stations, with newspaper, with television, and for us, a lot of just, you call it guerrilla marketing. In my case, going to Halifax Mooseheads games and not being able to afford to actually get inside the game and work with the Mooseheads. They weren't willing to do that. So we had to stand outside the arena, late at night in the cold. And there we are with flyers, just kind of, and I say we, I mean me, handing them out, encouraging people to sign up for this road hockey tournament, and of course most of the people at a CHL game are not actually young kids. So that the people that are playing in our events are not the people that would be coming out of that game, but they might be their parents or their uncles or grandparents, or whatever. But, those were, once you get the streets, you got to figure out a way to get the teams in. And that wasn't easy either.
Was it called Play On right from the start?
Well, actually, the story there is that I wanted to call it Game On. People may be familiar with, the Mike Myers movie and that kind of part of our culture. But Game On was a trademark that was owned by the NHL. And when we asked for the rights to use that, they declined. So I had to come up with a new name, and I just felt like Play On was a good name. And it turned out to be a good name. And I kind of learned this later, like when we were in the events, and, our events, again, were right on the street. And so there'd be curbs on the side, and the curbs, they're only 7 inches high or something. And so sometimes the ball would bounce up onto the sidewalks, and the referees would yell, "Play on," meaning like keep the game going, even though the ball's on the sidewalk. You don't have to stop, no whistle, and I don't know, it just really seemed to catch on. People really enjoyed that, and as time went on, I liked it more and more from a from a sense of or an aspect of just encouraging people to play and to be physically active and to engage in wholesome recreational activity, and the kind of message became a lot bigger than street hockey. It became much more than that.
Let's go back to 2003 then. You choose Halifax. That first event, what immediately stands out for you as something that you viewed as a success? There had to have been that, obviously, because it continued and grew. Also, what maybe stood out for you as some of the challenges that you had encountered and that you knew you were going to have to reckon with if you were going to go to other cities? What comes to mind?
Well, a few things really stand out about that event as I look back. I mean, obviously that was 17 years ago now, but the one thing that I thought I was at the time, I thought I'd kind of thought through everything in advance, but in the event world, as you know, things go wrong. Many things go wrong all at the same time often, and as one person, you simply can't address them all. But the one thing that I hadn't thought through very well was the scheduling of the tournament. And, we took registrations right up until noon on the day before the start of the tournament. We ended up getting about 120 teams into the event. I can't remember if it was 120, 121, something like that. And, there we are now. It's 1:00 on Friday afternoon. Our event's going to start on Saturday morning. We've got all of these different divisions, several teams in different divisions and by age and gender, et cetera. And then, we've got all of these different rinks that we were building. And we had to do the scheduling at the same time we were building the rinks. And so you're out there kind of hefting fence around. It's really tough to be on your laptop, working a scheduling system. And then figuring out exactly how, which team was going to play where, and making sure that all teams got 3 games against 3 different teams, and that skill levels were matched up, and that, the tournament started on time and was going to end on time, and with the daylight that we had. And, we had a celebrity game scheduled at noon with the Trailer Park Boys. And I'll tell you that story if you want separately. But basically, scheduling the tournament, that first tournament, just completely defeated me. And, we learned very quickly as we thought about rolling it out elsewhere, that if we were going to run this type of a mass participation event with such short turnaround times between registration deadline and scheduling, that we had to fix that problem. And so we survived it. It was a disaster, truthfully. And then the process of running the tournament, from getting the game sheets in and properly recording them and filing them. I had brought my wife to the event, and I said, yeah, like maybe you might want to come and just kind of see what we're doing. And she thought she was going for a vacation. Well, little did she realize that I was completely over my head, and she ended up building most of the systems that really led to the tournament management side of our operation. So there was that, and then in addition to that, when you're running all of these rinks down this street, and we hadn't thought through that there are some sewer grates, that the balls were just small enough that they could go through these sewer grates. And so here we are playing, and balls were constantly going into these sewers, and we didn't have a way to seal them all off. And so I ended up having to myself. I was kind of running back and forth up and down Cogswell Street. And for those that are familiar with Halifax, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I like for hours and hours, I would have my role would be going to our master scoreboard, filling my jean pockets up with hockey balls, and then running up and down these streets to make sure there was always a ball available, so that the games could keep going. And what happened after that event, I think this is an interesting story. I mean, it's really stands out for me, but I spent so much time running back and forth between the scoreboard area and the rinks at the far end of the street, which, really were, 800, 900 meters away from where the scoreboard was, that by the end of the event, my thighs became so bruised just from the pounding of the balls the hockey balls that were in my pocket against my thigh. There was just so many repeated little motions there that by the end of the event, I mean, I was a healthy, active 27-year-old, and I almost couldn't walk very well after the event because of the deep bruising on my thighs. So, there were so many little systems and things like that we hadn't thought about, that we had to work out. We had problems finding enough referees. We had problems. We were way understaffed. I could go on and on. But again, those are the things you learn whenever you start a business and you run it for the very first time. You gotta pay the price in terms of learning experience, and we did that.
It's absolutely true. We could spend easily an hour just on that principle alone, that it's really easy to sit and and throw stones about, well, why didn't you this or why didn't you that or whatever else. And you just got to get into these things and live through them and learn to do by doing, and then just continue to sharpen the saw, I think, as you go. But one of the phrases that you used was that when you were referring to the scheduling, and I'm feeling stress over here just listening to you describe what it was like to live through that thing. But to the scheduling particularly, you said it completely defeated me. And yet you went on and decided, okay, well, here are all these things that we know we need to do better that we didn't think of. We're going to carry on. What was the next step after that in terms of continuing and looking to ultimately grow, play on?
Well, the Trailer Park Boys coming to that event really helped us out. It was the local radio station that made that introduction. They played in the celebrity game, and you know what? A lot of people came to watch. And so we got a lot of pictures from the event where there were just hordes and hordes of people gathered around these rinks. We took those pictures and the testimonials from those that had played in the event. Because remember, people had never tried anything like this. It was so new. So the people in Halifax were saying things to us like, even though it was so imperfect, they were saying, this is better than Christmas. And it was just so much fun. And we got many, many testimonials. I don't remember how many exactly, but so many that we took those pictures and testimonials and we went back to the NHL. And we said, listen, our concept worked. We didn't do it perfectly, but here's the pictures, here's the testimonials. We'd really like to roll it out in more cities. We need some support. We asked for financing. They turned us down. However, they did agree to let us use their logo as an endorsement on our website and marketing materials, not as a title sponsor, but as a kind of a secondary sponsor. This was in 2004. And it took a lot of work to get the NHL's involvement. And of course, there was a whole process there. But the long and short is we did get their support. And as soon as we got their logo, we were able to get sponsors, because sponsors wanted to be connected to their logo. And so we were able to get Sport Check, and we got Coca-Cola, and we were able to get Domino's Pizza, and Dodge gave us some vehicles to use. And now we were rolling, you know, and we planned a 5-city tour. We picked 5 cities. And so that was 2004, and we went back to Halifax. Our Halifax event grew considerably relative to the first year. And each of the other events that we operated were larger than our first year in Halifax had been. We tightened up a lot of our systems. There were still really, you know, real problems with the business side of the event, because really when you're running 5 events and you're not yet fully developed in terms of, you know, all of society doesn't know about these things yet, or you know, and it's seasonal. So your revenues only come in 2 months of the year, but your costs are 12 months of the year. And so, you know, we ran these great events, and they were really well loved, except for that we were losing money. And, you know, that was kind of a big problem with the second year. But that's the story. I mean, it didn't get easy from there, Kevin. At the end of 2004, for those who might remember that period of time, that was when there was the first big NHL lockout. And after that first year, the NHL decided they were shutting down operations. They closed down all of their marketing and other related partnerships, and we were one of those. So after 1 year of running Play On in partnership with the NHL, we were you know, subject to that same lockout. And losing the NHL meant we lost all of those sponsors. So we were in a situation where we're thinking, okay, well, we've got something growing here. It still has some challenges, but, you know, what do we do if we want to continue?
So what did you do?
Well, we got a little bit lucky again. You know, I formed a partnership that year with TSN. So that was, you know, the Bell Group. That really saved us in that season. TSN was, you know, obviously committed to growing hockey, and there was no NHL operating, so they used it as a strategy to try to just keep interest in the game and, you know, sustain their position as a leader from the broadcast side. We expanded and added 1 more city. TSN didn't give us any financing, but they did give us some media promotion. And so it was that same kind of model where we tried to leverage the support they were able to give us to find some sponsors. We found just enough. We got really lucky with the Speed Stick brand. They gave us some funding, just enough funding to operate in 6 cities. And the TSN, what they did is they did pay for the construction of this Redwood Cup. It was a $10,000 trophy made out of redwood and silver. And they arranged for us to have permission to have our own dedicated exhibit in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And so now we had something that we were working towards. We wanted to have a national championship where the winners from these cities would come in. And 2005 was the first year that we did that. And we held that event in London at Victoria Park. And Pierre Maguire actually came, and he did the commentating for that event. And we had our first national championship. We awarded the Redwood Cup for the first time. A team from Calgary won it, called the Slapnuts, and they got their own dedicated exhibit in the Hockey Hall of Fame. So that was, you know, that was 2005, and you know, some great memories from that year.
What a Canadian thing to say, that we have a group called the Slapnuts in the Hall of Fame for our national game. It's part of your legacy, Scott.
You know, they got to choose their own team names, and that was a whole other kind of side of these events, right? Is trying to regulate 6,000 teams and making sure they all choose a wholesome family, you know, type of team name, so that you know, if they ever did get mentioned on air, that you know, the networks wouldn't be disappointed. But those guys were good guys. I'm still in touch with a lot of those guys, you know, and it was great. It was a great season. I mean, I was talking to my wife this morning, Kevin, and I told her I was doing this, and it's been such a journey. But people see that we were able to continue it annually for so long, but really at the end of each season, it was like a complete shutdown, complete restart again. And I've already described the very first time we did it, the time we did it with the NHL, and the time we did it with TSN. Well, after that year with TSN, guess what? TSN decided they didn't want to continue the partnership. They saw a real opportunity in what we were doing, but we weren't super well resourced, and they thought, well, if we bring in Scotiabank or our own big partner, maybe we can just own street hockey outright in Canada. So if we go away, Scott's got nothing, and maybe we can do our own thing and start our own entity. And they tried to do that. They actually that was their decision. They said, you know what, we have our own new events division. They created this subdivision called TSN Events. And they decided they were going to try to build their own street hockey property to compete against me. And they would have been successful if they would have been able to get a sponsor in, but the NHL lockout continued. They never were able to get their sponsor, and they of course weren't quite as committed on the they weren't quite as passionate as I was. They just were looking at it from a revenue generation standpoint, and so the math didn't work for them. They ended up not continuing. But I still wasn't able to find anybody to come in and replace them. And so after that 2005 season, with the lockout still continuing, I had to shut the event down and take a job. I ended up joining Deloitte in their strategy and consulting practice, and thought that I was leaving Play On forever. The Ivy Business School, a professor there actually wrote a case about all of this and my experience going to Deloitte and working there, and ultimately, a decision that came a year and a half later when the opportunity presented itself to maybe go back to Play On. And that case, according to my understanding, has been, a fun one for some students there.
We just we got a comment from Roxanne Robinson. Thanks, Roxanne. We appreciate you watching, saying there could be another entire episode just about team names. There could be, and I can only guess. I'm not trying to set you down that rabbit hole, Scott, because one of the challenges here is we're only, I appreciate, just barely skimming the surface. There's so many things that I'd like to ask you about, but I really want to make sure that we give people a sense of the journey. When I think about Play On, and I wonder whether I'm in the majority, if there even is such a thing, I am kind of, even though I know because of our personal relationship, and I know a lot about something about the different incarnations and the comings and goings of partners and sponsors and whatnot. But I kind of default to thinking about Play On in partnership with the Hockey Night in Canada name. And when you and I connected, that was when I was working inside Bell Media for some of the stations here in London. And that also coincided with Rogers doing their big deal with the NHL and how that affected CBC, where the Hockey Night in Canada brand is attached. Now I'm throwing too much at us all here all at once, but I remember a lot of conversations between you and I about that and how that was really kind of rattling the infrastructure of what I knew as Hockey Night in Canada and Play On together. If we can maybe pick the story back up to now you're dark. You're shut down here in around 2005. How did the lights get turned back on, and where did you arrive at this partnership with the Hockey Night in Canada name?
Well, Kevin, how interesting is it that Roxanne Robinson is watching? Roxanne Robinson is a big part of this story, and she is in Halifax. And she was a mother of two wonderful children who enjoyed playing and Play On in Halifax. And she wrote in one day, this is back in, I might get my timeline off a little, but I think it was either late 2006 or 2007. And she said, my kids love this event. People love this event, something to that effect. She can comment and maybe tell us exactly what she said if she remembers, but she wanted to play a role in seeing the event return. And I can't tell the whole, I'd have to write a whole book about Roxanne Robinson. One day I hope I get to do that. But she was a big reason why this event came back. And she became our event director in Halifax. And even in some years when she wasn't formally our event director, she really was, such a huge reason this event was successful, not just in Halifax, all over the country. She ended up traveling all over the country with us. And I'd be amiss if I didn't mention, this. You're talking to me, you and I, but this really is such a bigger story than me. There were literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that made this program possible. But Roxanne, sent that email. She encouraged me that day. She said, you got to bring it back. And I was working at Deloitte, and I wanted to bring it back, but I didn't have the ability to bring it back. And long and short is, I figured something out around that period of time. I didn't figure it out on my own. It happened by virtue of things like Roxanne reaching out. But I thought, maybe there's a possibility that instead of operating these events with a truck and trailer model, going city to city to city, maybe we could figure out a way where we license these events to local event organizers in each city. And maybe they could, call and organize the referees and find the teams and find the local vendors and bring the community together better than I could centrally out of London, because it's just too big. And there was a gentleman in Halifax. His name was Derek Martin. He's still there and involved in the sports and entertainment industry. But he called me up, and it was his idea. And he said, what do you think about licensing the event? Could we bring it back if you show me everything that you know from a consulting standpoint, and teach me how to run the event, and maybe I can use my relationships here to operate it. And we worked out a little arrangement for him to do that. And Roxanne was really the one that came in and ran that whole event for Derek. And she would be an amazing person to hear her talk about her experience making that event possible. So, but long and short, Kevin, is I was at Deloitte. We had one event in 2007 in Halifax under this new model. It went well enough, like it grew again relative to the size that we had in the past. And I knew that, really that people really enjoyed these events, and that they had so much more potential than I was able to deliver on my own. And so anyways, while I was at Deloitte for those 2 years, I actually never really stopped trying to do what I had always wanted to do from the beginning. Even I hadn't mentioned this previously in our conversation, but even before I wanted the NHL to come in, I really wanted this to be a Canadian thing, because I just saw street hockey as so much more developed in Canada than in the US. And I wanted Hockey Night in Canada and the CBC to get behind it. But in all of my efforts to get through to them and to get a meeting or to have a conversation, several years of efforts, they never responded to me. But while I was at Deloitte, I got an email back for the first time after 4 or so plus years of trying. And they invited me in to talk about the concept of reviving Play On. And I still remember that meeting day. I had quit my job at Deloitte by that point in time, because I decided that I wasn't feeling like my full capabilities were being utilized at Deloitte. And that was another whole story, but I just loved running these events so much. And I wanted to try to bring them back with this new licensing model. And I had already gone to Alberta for a University of Alberta alumni event. I played in a golf tournament, and I met a guy while I was playing in this golf tournament. His name was Vern Gerhardt, and he had worked as the executive director for Basketball Alberta, and he had just finished running the 3-on-3 Hoop It Up program for the NBA in Alberta. And he had said, geez, I'd really be interested in running that street hockey program you ran in Alberta if there was an opportunity to do that. So now I had this one franchise kind of possible arrangement in Halifax, and now I had another one developing in Alberta, and I just thought, what? There's no way that I can keep working at Deloitte and doing both. Like, I've got to make a decision, because these events were it was 10 times more work running events than it was being a strategy consultant for Deloitte. So I just knew I had to go all in, and with people like Roxanne encouraging me and my wife's support and believing in me, I quit my job at Deloitte. I got this meeting with Hockey Night in Canada. I remember that day so well, because there were 11 people in the room. I was late. I couldn't find a parking spot. I had pink eye, and everything was just, and I was all in. Like, if I didn't get this deal with Hockey Night in Canada, I had no idea what I was going to do. But fortunately, Hockey Night in Canada agreed to become the new title sponsor and media partner of Play On after after that meeting. They took several weeks to review and consider, but ultimately they came on board, and it was a very successful partnership. It lasted formally for 7 years. They gave us some funding. They gave us a lot of media. We were able to take that media and bring in new business partners like StubHub and Booster Juice and UPS, and I could go on. But essentially, if you watched NHL hockey during the playoffs or at the end of the regular season between 2008 and 2014, you would have seen a lot of television ads promoting registration in the Play On program. And it was that support from CBC and Hockey Night in Canada that really allowed us to really roll out this new franchise model. It became quite easy to get people to want to be a part of the program with Hockey Night in Canada involved. And that's what we did. We found great people in every market. And oftentimes I had to choose between great people that all wanted to run the events. And we had built an operating model and a critical path to help manage the project management. And we and I say we, there were so many people that were involved that were beyond me. But gradually, organically, we grew it from 8 cities in 2008 to 12, and then to 15, and then to 17, and 19, and 21. By the time that we got to 21 cities, we had 25 more cities that were writing saying, "Can we please host this event?" And at that point, it was just so difficult to decide who should be able to run the events, which cities should we operate in, and how do we reach this many markets in a period of time of May and June, which is really the event season from a Canada standpoint. I mean, these events don't work when it's snowing or when it's cold, or even when you're competing against the ice hockey season. So you really only have a 2-month window to run all of these events. And anyways, that's some of the story, Kevin, and I'm glad we met in that period, and so many fond memories in so many of these cities. And I guess as I look back, I mean, I shake my head and can't believe the journey that it's been. But I like to joke about how I think I've literally swept the streets of almost every major city in Canada. And how many people can say they've had that opportunity? And
the way you've described the meeting that ultimately helped to solidify the partnership with the Hockey Night in Canada name, Pink Eye and Can't Get a Parking Spot. I'm envisioning Tommy Boy with his hair sticking up and trying to go and sell brake parts to Ted Zielinski with David Spade beside him. But what I'm taking away from that is you use the term all in, which is funny because you were saying that at the exact same time that Mike LaFrance was commenting, Scott is all in, no exceptions. And you 2 or 3 times you use that exact phrase, all in. It's clear to me that you are all through the time that I got to work with you from a marketing perspective. You certainly were. Reflecting on it now, how does it feel to you to look back on that and to have it sitting dark currently at the time of this conversation? What does that feel like for you?
Well, I'm at peace, Kevin. I mean, when you look back on the whole journey, I mean, we didn't talk about the phase after 2014 where CBC lost the rights to broadcast the NHL and Rogers took over, and Rogers wasn't as committed to the future of the property. They decided to start a competing property called Hometown Hockey, and it ran through the NHL season, whereas our event ran in the off season, and they needed a program that could help them drive viewership, and our program being in the off season wouldn't help with that. They offered the opportunity for me to run it through the winter, and I declined because, as I said, from a player standpoint, I didn't think it would be a good experience playing in the cold and in the snow. So I personally financed the sustaining of the program in 2015, 2016, and 2017. In 2016, the NHL came to me and approached me about partnering on the program. However, they weren't really reasonable in my view. They didn't have the interests of Canada or the players that had played in this event in mind. They wanted me to expand it and focus it in the U.S. They wanted me to change the delivery model of the event, and they weren't willing to assume the risk. They wanted me to assume all the risk in doing that. And I look back on that period of time, and I feel good about it. I mean, I told them no, and I walked away. And people thought that maybe I made the wrong decision. And I know that some of my former employees would probably still be employed, or perhaps might have been employed if I could have found a way to make that work. But at the end of the day, I did what I felt was right. I tried to sustain the program the way that we had built it, and in the interest of the players. At the end of the day, once we got to the 2018 season, I could no longer afford to finance it on my own. I needed a new title sponsor. The NHL had essentially decided that they didn't want to work with Scott Hill because of what I had done in terms of walking away from them. And they really control the industry. So they have relationships with Hockey Canada and the Scotiabanks of the world. It's a very small industry. And so, perhaps I made some mistakes there. I'm not sure. But really, I feel good about what we accomplished. I mean, we accomplished what we set out to do. And when you look back on it, we did it. We had to reset it 5 different times. And we did it each one of those times. And at this juncture, we would have to reset it again. The world has changed a lot, since, and I'll just speak to that briefly. But as you know, in the early days, marketing these types of events, was different than it is today. These days, corporate partners don't need events so much anymore. They reach a market through digital technology, mobile phones, special, video programming such as what we're doing. That's a better way to market than events. Events are super expensive, super labor intensive. And so it's very, very difficult in this day and age to attract sponsorship for events, even national ones that are reaching, in our case, hundreds of thousands of people. It still was more cost effective to market a different way. And without, the full weight of the NHL or someone like that behind a property like this, it really, it's very, very difficult to convince a sponsor to come in. And so we haven't been able to do that. And, I do hope that at some point, there might be an opportunity for Play On to return again. And I mainly hope that because I love the people that I work with, and I loved being with the people of Canada on the ground, and I loved the smiles on the faces of the kids. And I always tried to run the program in the interest of the players. And there's pros and cons to that. The pros were that we became a bit of a cultural phenomenon. The downside is that maybe we didn't do enough to satisfy the interests of the big players in the hockey industry. And I always hope that maybe they would come together, but they haven't yet. So, now there are other events in every city across Canada. There's lots of little street hockey events that have popped up, and some of those are trying to grow bigger like we did. And I guess we'll just see what happens. But it's it's been an emotional roller coaster. It's been a tremendous journey. I've gained so many positive experiences and positive relationships by virtue of this program. And the truth is, I'm always going to keep exploring any path that looks possible to bring the program back. I did spend a lot of time in 2019 trying to find a way to bring the program back, and I almost was successful in doing that. But ultimately, that didn't work out. So that's where we're at. And I think if the government of Canada or the people of Canada, it's so difficult to organize at the grassroots level when you're in a country of this size. But at some point, with today is Bell Let's Talk Day. People are talking about the increase in challenges with mental health, and particularly amongst our youth and our teenagers. And the linkages are being made between the need for physical activity and the relationship between physical activity and strengthening mental health. And the whole Play On concept, the whole Play On brand is a powerful and can again be a powerful tool, I believe, in delivering this messaging and encouraging kids to play and to be active, for mental health and physical health and so many other reasons. But I'm just really grateful that we had this chance to catch up, Kevin, and I'm so happy for you and for our acquaintance, and I just think you're really doing a terrific job.
Thank you. I've always appreciated your support and your kind words, and you addressed what I was going to bring up next in what you just shared, Scott, on the heels of you having mentioned, among other things, that the world has changed since Play On first became a reality, and how a lot of the big brands, not just across Canada, but across the world, are really looking to try to deliver their messages digitally and whatnot. And I would argue that we need, and this is just purely my own opinion, but that I think that we, the collective we, meaning humans, need things like Play On more than ever. For physical activity, absolutely, but just for the human connection, the sense of community, everything that it entails. And it's been interesting for me, even within the last few days, since we've known that you and I were going to have this conversation, to perceive that heart is still beating. It's beating right now. We've got people that are sitting in on this conversation with us right now. That there must be a reason why the Play On social media channels have not just been turned dark. It still exists there. I'm convinced that there's a heart there. It's almost like waiting for a band to get back together. It's just like, okay, well, the stars aren't lined up right now. But if and when it happens, we're there. That's the sense that I get of it. And it sounds to me like you are more than open to that happening. How fair is that to say?
I think it's fair to say that I would do everything in my power to see this program come back. And, I guess I've just been waiting for a couple of years for a phone call from somebody who could help me do that. I feel like I've personally explored every avenue within my power to try to bring it back. And so far, every one of those avenues has turned up a dead end. I'm hearing things that the NHL loves what I did, and is talking now about rolling out their own program like Play On in the United States. I think that would be great, in terms of growing the game there. I think, as you know, for almost 20 years now, I've been encouraging them to do that. If that's what they choose to do, and to not involve Scott Hill, I mean, I certainly respect their decision. But Play On, you can't take away the memories, and you can't take away what we did. And should there ever be an opportunity, and I think this probably is a Sport Canada thing, if it does come back, it'll likely be somebody at Health Canada or Sport Canada, or those two ministries coming together saying, you know what, this was huge. It was still growing when it shut down. There was no reason for it to ever go away. It just didn't get funded. And, it really wouldn't take much for them in the grand scheme of things to get this whole program back on the rails and to turn the story around and get Canadians playing again. And, I guess that's one of the reasons why, I haven't done any interviews in 2 years, Kevin, and you called and asked me, and if it was somebody else, I probably would have passed. But, maybe that's why I did this today, because I'm doing some other things now. I've been looking for the next thing. It's difficult to jump from running something like this to, I found, to jump from doing this to anything else, because nothing that I'll ever do will be quite as enjoyable or fulfilling, I don't think. But if what we're doing today leads to a conversation, perhaps where, it helps people understand that there is still a heartbeat, that people do still love it. I still get random calls from people out of nowhere. I got one from Calgary just last week, and somebody left a message and just said, please bring it back. That event meant everything to us. I get artwork in the mail from people that are, artists who painted scenes of the events, and they just send them to me. And I get emails and social media messages from people saying, please figure it out, Scotty, bring it back, and every time I get that, I tell you, it just, hits me right there, because nobody wants it back more than me. But
it gets my dander up, because to me, it's an absolute, all you've got to do is fall off the log, no brainer. But my experience has been, having worked for and run as fast as I could away from a large media company in Canada, and also having the experience I mentioned at the start of the conversation, my history in motorsports, and we worked with a very large corporation and sanctioning body there. I want to be careful, because it's not fair to speak in generalizations, but I do think there's some truth to my view of things, is that the spirit of an entrepreneur, of somebody who wants to really get his or her hands dirty in the grassroots, sweep the streets, bruise their legs by running hockey balls because they're going down to the sewers, work with those people in communities like the Roxannes that you mentioned. The heart and the spirit and the ethos and the work ethic of somebody like that is just, in my view, fundamentally different than how a large corporation works. And the two don't necessarily look to see the same things. And I think that you've become caught in the crosshairs of that, where there are a few times where those mutually beneficial deliverables, actions, impressions, whatever you want to say, have lined up, and we're at a time right now where they have not. And then you've got the sponsors, you've mentioned them a number of times, and how do they deliver their message, their brand experience to people. And there were so many times you and I spoke when I was still in the media that I was just wanting to pull my hair out, because I could see how much you were agonizing over, do I continue this or not? And it was clear to me how much it meant to you, and still means. Forgive me, please, for the soliloquy. There's got to be a way, but I'm sort of feeling like there's a sort of a Back to the Future, like fourth dimensional way that we just don't see yet, because I perceive that the old model of that you've got to have the big behemoth and then that tide rises all ships. I think that ship may have sailed, Scott, but I do think that there's got to be a way. I wonder if we'll find it. Might be fun to look back on this conversation in a couple of years.
Well, Kevin, I think we're thinking the same way, and I have been exploring, some other alternatives, a different business model, and we'll see where that goes. It's just awesome to have been a part of. I'm really so grateful, and the people that are watching, I can see some of their, some photos on my left on the screen, and I know some of those people are former staff and friends, and just so grateful that they stood shoulder to shoulder with me through all of those years, and that we did that together. Nobody's ever going to forget it.
Let's leave this as a to be continued. And if you would be open for a part 2 or 3 or 4, or we can take Roxanne's suggestion and do just for fun, an episode on all of the names. But truly, we could easily do a couple of hours just on one city, or what it meant when you had such equity in the name with Hockey Night in Canada. And I don't know if people really understand that when Rogers took over that agreement with the NHL, what that does in the hierarchy of, well, here's this brand, and what does this really mean, and who owns what, and how does it, it's a lot of people get caught up in the wash of those large kinds of agreements. There's so many stories there that we've barely even touched on, Scott, but an hour goes by quickly, doesn't it? But thank you for making this time and for sharing with me and with us. I know this is going to mean a lot to a lot of people that have been kind of wondering where do things sit and where might it go. And you never know, maybe somebody is sitting there with the idea that you need to hear that would that this will help shake loose. I hope so. But either way, let's not make this the last conversation that we have about it.
Definitely won't be. Kevin, so great to be with you today. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat again.
My pleasure. Absolutely. That's Scott Hill, the founder of Play On. If you're still with us through this conversation, you know all about it now. Canada's largest hockey tournament and sports festival. They hold the Guinness record as the largest street hockey tournament in the world. And I think that you can see, I want to be careful to rein myself in a little bit, the reverence that I hold Scott in and entrepreneurs in general. So if you've watched this or you've come back to watch or listen to the recording, I would encourage you to reach out to Scott if you've got ideas or suggestions, or post them on the Play On social media feeds. And won't it be fun to look back on this? And I mean, if it's meant to be for things to come back, I guess time will show that. But either way, there are literally millions of Canadians that have had a wonderful experience thanks to that idea being born. And whatever way you look at it, that's an absolute unqualified success. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. This is episode number 97. All other 96 of them are available at noscheduleman.com. Just click the podcast page and you can find access to the entire archive of episodes. If you'd like to be notified of future episodes, sign up to my email list. It's free. Imagine that. Everybody wants to send you emails, and I guess I'm no different. So I can spam you and tell you to get into my mindset and marketing mastermind community. No, I don't spam people, but I do enjoy sharing stories like Scott's. And if it's the kind of thing that you're interested in, I would love to have a connection with you and continue to learn and grow together. And the best way to stay in touch with me is through noscheduleman.com. On behalf of Scott Hill, I'm Kevin Bulmer. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, episode number 97. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining us and take care.